It is visible in any major capital or historic civic building, and one feature would immediately capture anyone's attention: the doors. They are enormous, far larger than any human could reasonably need. Conventional explanations point to aesthetics, social hierarchy, or architectural flair, yet the sheer scale invites deeper questions. Why devote immense effort and resources to entrances that dwarf those who pass through them every day? Could these monumental portals be relics of a forgotten civilization, later misinterpreted or adapted by succeeding generations? The implications challenge accepted history and force us to reconsider the story we've been told about our past. The scale of lost portals. The urban landscapes, particularly the civic infrastructures constructed during the late 19th century, the sheer magnitude of these structures fundamentally challenges our basic assumptions about construction, logistics, speed, and functional scale during the Victorian era. Consider the staggering energy expenditure required to heat, cool, and maintain spaces with 12 to 15-foot doorways using the primitive technology available at the time. This economic irrationality sits at the core of the inheritor narrative. This paradigm-shifting proposition suggests that modern humanity did not actually design or build these massive civic infrastructures. Instead, our ancestors may have simply reoccupied and modified the salvaged remains of a pre-existing civilization. The towering entrances and cavernous halls we see today might not be decorative triumphs of the era, but rather functional remnants of an overlooked epoch. To understand the physical reality of this anomaly, we turn our attention to the Boston Old City Hall, a structure officially dated between 1862 and 1865. This building serves as a definitive template for the French Second Empire aesthetic, often referred to in the United States as the General Grant style. The defining feature of its facade is a set of massive main doors, stretching 12 to 14 feet in height, intricately crafted from diverse wood types and detailed with marble inlays. Architectural historians dismiss the sheer size of these portals as merely courtly, claiming they were designed simply to provide a strong upward thrust to the building facade. Yet the undeniable reality of maintaining such a colossal interior volume tells a different story. During a major rehabilitation of the property in 1971, strict city fire codes forced the interior to be entirely gutted. Much of the original circulation space was abruptly repurposed to house modern elevators and mechanical chases. This extensive remodeling effectively masked the true, monumental scale of the original interior volume. The anomalies deepen when examining the Melbourne General Post Office, a Renaissance revival masterpiece purportedly built in stages starting in 1860. The entire structure is conspicuously raised on a stepped plinth, an architectural decision mainstream historians claim was necessary to avoid the flooding of Elizabeth Street. The true intrigue lies in the dual-scale design of the building. Here, we witness grand 14-foot entrances situated immediately alongside dramatically smaller 7-foot servant entrances. Mainstream historical narratives confidently explain this away as a simple marker of social class distinction. This explanation ignores the astronomical cost and logistical impossibility of quarrying massive amounts of Brunswick bluestone and Tasmanian sandstone simply to make a point about social hierarchy. The presence of two entirely different functional scales integrated into a single structural core points to an environment designed for a vastly different set of physical proportions. We see this massive scale replicated globally, perhaps most dramatically at the Budapest Keleti railway station, constructed between 1881 and 1884. Designed by Gyula Rochlitz, the structure boasts a staggering 43-meter-high facade and a colossal 20-meter triumphal arch. Mainstream architectural consensus insists that this overwhelming height was an engineering necessity for air stratification, allowing heated air to rise far above the human level before the advent of electricity. They argue these massive arches acted as light wells to illuminate deep interiors. Yet, this narrative of purely environmental engineering falls apart upon close examination of administrative records from the mid-20th century. Between 1920 and 1950, thousands of municipal invoices from across the globe documented the mass lowering of doorways and dropping of ceilings. An entire era of architectural modification was dedicated to retrofitting these magnificent, oversized structures to accommodate modern heating, electrical systems, and the standard scale of the modern human. We are left looking at a fabricated world, tailored down to our size, hiding the monumental truth of its origins in plain sight. Biomechanics of a lost age. Stepping through those towering exterior facades brings us into a space that is arguably even more perplexing: the intimately bizarre interiors of the 19th century. We have to stop and seriously consider a fundamental problem of domestic life in these structures. Why would a society construct everyday household furnishings that actively work against the natural biomechanics of the human body? The dimensions of these interior spaces present a staggering physical challenge for the average person. When we look closely at the preserved artifacts from this era, a disturbing pattern emerges. The furniture appears explicitly scaled to match the colossal architecture rather than the actual physical stature of the Victorian occupant, who historically stood between 5'6" and 5'9" tall. To see this anomaly firsthand, we only need to look at the prized collections of our most prestigious museums and historic estates. Take the phenomenon of oversized furniture, specifically the infamous state bed at Harewood House. Designed by the legendary Thomas Chippendale in 1773, this was the most expensive piece of furniture he ever produced, costing over £400, which translates to roughly £50,000 in today's money. It features a massive frame containing 3 mattresses that completely dwarfs a normal human being. Mainstream historians insist these state bedrooms were merely designed to dazzle and impress royal guests with their sheer verticality. Yet, sleeping surfaces and seating arrangements of this magnitude suggest a completely different residential use case. We see the exact same biomechanical impossibility in the Gilded Age plantation-made furniture housed at the Louisiana State Museum and the Ema Hogg Wynedale collection. These collections showcase items of incredible craftsmanship, but they feature physical dimensions that blatantly exceed any modern standard of comfort. Imagine trying to relax in a chair where the seat sits a full 3 feet off the ground. Your legs would simply dangle in the air. This is not functional for a typical human. It reinforces the argument that the makers were building for a profoundly different type of occupant. The physical toll of navigating these buildings extends far beyond where people sat or slept. We must fiercely analyze the biomechanical reality of the staircases built into these civic and residential hubs. A recurring theme in the inheritor narrative is the stark, undeniable contrast between public grand staircases and the hidden servant stairs located within the exact same building. Grand historic staircases frequently feature risers measuring anywhere from 10 to 14 inches in height. Ascending steps of this magnitude requires a grueling, almost ceremonial gait that places immense strain on the hips and knees. To put this into perspective, modern building codes strictly prohibit 12-inch risers in standard dry environments. You will only find steps this steep legally permitted in specialized environments like swimming pools or hydrotherapy spas, where the natural buoyancy of water actively assists the climber in lifting their body weight. Yet, in the dry, public areas of historic 19th century buildings, these exhausting staircases are the primary mode of upward movement. The official explanation dismisses this as a triumph of form over function. This excuse falls entirely flat when you open the door to the servant quarters in the very same structures. The hidden servant stairs flawlessly adhere to the standard 6 to 7 inch rise we use today. This lower riser height ensures high efficiency and low physical strain, allowing for quick, continuous movement up and down the building. We are left looking at 2 entirely different biological standards built into the same foundation, forcing us to question who these grand, taxing pathways were truly built to accommodate. Giants, hoaxes, and missing bones. We must now confront the most sensational aspect of this entire architectural investigation: the supposed photographic and archaeological proof of a physically larger human population living among us. We are staring at a profound historical mystery that demands an answer. We have to determine if we are looking at the remnants of a massive, meticulously executed institutional cover-up designed to protect a fragile evolutionary timeline, or if we are simply falling victim to a Victorian era absolutely obsessed with sensationalism and the earliest forms of photo manipulation. Proponents of the inheritor theory frequently present hundreds of vintage photographs from the late 19th century showing towering individuals standing 7 to 9 feet tall. These massive figures are dressed in perfectly tailored clothing, appearing as fully integrated members of everyday society, casually standing next to normal-sized citizens. These images are visually striking, but they require a deep understanding of early photographic technology. Analysts reviewing the era, specifically examining the techniques showcased in the Victorian Giants exhibition, reveal a period marked by intense, highly skilled experimentation in cutouts and photomontage. Pioneering photographers like Oscar Ragelander and Julia Margaret Cameron were mastering a technique known as extractions. They would meticulously cut a human figure from one glass negative and seamlessly blend it into an entirely new background, using multiple exposures to create an artistic or dramatic composition. This technical flexibility in early media casts severe doubt on these viral photographs when they are divorced from their original context and provenance. We are looking at the 19th century equivalent of advanced digital manipulation, making it nearly impossible to accept these images as definitive, unassailable proof of a giant race walking the streets of our modern cities. The photographic anomalies are only half the story. Between 1870 and 1910, newspapers across the United States frequently published highly detailed, sensationalist reports claiming the discovery of massive human skeletons. These reports consistently described remains measuring 8 to 10 feet in length, unearthed in ancient burial mounds and modern construction sites, particularly throughout the rich archaeological zones of the Mississippi Valley. At the time, immense cultural biases held that Native Americans were far too primitive to have constructed such sophisticated earthen fortifications. This prejudice led writers to attribute these massive structures to a lost, superior race of giants. Many of these historical reports explicitly state that these massive skeletal remains were carefully boxed up, loaded onto trains, and shipped directly to the Smithsonian Institution for elite scientific study. Yet, when you search the current catalogs of the Smithsonian today, absolutely no records of these specific giant skeletons exist. Adherents of the theory fiercely argue that academics confiscated and actively suppressed this physical evidence. They claim the establishment could not handle the truth, opting to hide the bones in vast subterranean archives rather than rewrite the established timeline of human evolution. We must balance this heavy accusation of an institutional cover-up against mainstream historiography and the biological realities of the era. Historical critics maintain that this period was dominated by a giant fad, heavily fueled by yellow journalism meant to sell newspapers to a gullible public. This was also the newly burgeoning, highly misunderstood era of early paleontology. Untrained observers, construction workers, and eager local reporters were frequently digging up the massive bones of prehistoric megafauna, such as ancient mammoths and mastodons, and completely misidentifying them as giant human remains. Furthermore, this era was notorious for elaborate, highly profitable archaeological fakes. Unscrupulous showmen carved massive stone men, buried them in farm fields, and then conveniently discovered them a year later to charge admission to the public, creating proven, lucrative fakes like the infamous Cardiff Giant and the Tauhannock Giant. We are forced to weigh the absolute certainty of these proven historical hoaxes and misidentified mammoth bones against the enduring, tantalizing possibility that the archives of our most trusted institutions have been deliberately sanitized to hide a much larger truth: the erasure of an empire. You might assume that an entire global empire, spanning thousands of miles and encompassing millions of people, could not simply vanish from the historical record without a trace. Yet we are going to examine the exact moment when a massive territory did precisely that. At the very core of the inheritor narrative lies the Tartaria hypothesis, a proposition suggesting that a highly advanced, globally connected civilization thrived right up until the late 18th century. According to this theory, this society did not just slowly decline. It was systematically and deliberately erased from world maps and history books to facilitate a massive cultural reset. The sheer scale of this alleged cover-up forces us to look closely at the surviving cartographic evidence of the era. When you examine the highly detailed maps produced during the 16th and 17th centuries, a completely different geopolitical reality emerges. Master cartographers like Abraham Ortelius in his 1570 World Atlas and Nicolaes Vischer in 1657 boldly and prominently labeled a colossal expanse of land spanning all the way from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. They called this vast territory Tartaria, or sometimes designated it as the realm of the Magni Chami. This was not a small, disputed borderland. It was depicted as a sprawling, dominant entity encompassing what we now know as Siberia, Mongolia, and huge swaths of Central Asia. Then, quite suddenly, right around the year 1775, this massive global presence was abruptly scrubbed from the map. Cartographic historians offer a strictly administrative explanation for this sudden disappearance. They argue that the word Tartary was never an actual empire, but merely a geographic catch-all term used by ignorant European mapmakers to describe regions they had not yet fully surveyed. Mainstream academia insists that as the Russian Empire and the Qing dynasty rapidly expanded and finally began producing their own highly accurate, localized geographic surveys, this vague, blanket label was naturally replaced by modern administrative divisions and sovereign borders. The inheritor narrative completely rejects this administrative excuse, tying the cartographic erasure directly to catastrophic physical anomalies found in major cities today. This brings us to the explosive mud flood theory. This concept proposes that a sudden, global cataclysm, perhaps a pole shift or a weaponized environmental disaster, triggered massive waves of mud that effectively buried the original ground floors of Tartarian architecture worldwide. You can walk through the streets of Chicago, London, and San Francisco today and see the physical remnants of this event. Countless 19th century buildings feature massive, fully formed doors and grand windows sitting absurdly below street level, staring directly into the dirt. Mainstream architects casually identify these submerged levels as English basements or light wells, designed to maximize ventilation in dense urban plots. Adherents of the mud flood theory argue these are actually the tops of the original, towering entrances of the old world, hastily buried by the Great Reset. This physical burial was allegedly followed by a campaign of total atmospheric destruction. We must fiercely scrutinize the devastating 19th century urban infernos, specifically the Great Fires of Chicago in 1871, Boston in 1872, and San Francisco in 1906. The Chicago fire alone completely leveled more than 3 square miles of massive stone and brick infrastructure and killed hundreds of people. For over a century, the public was fed the story of an accidental fire started by a clumsy cow kicking over a lantern in a barn, a convenient myth that was completely and officially debunked in 1997. The sheer precision and total devastation of these massive urban fires point to something far more deliberate. The narrative argues these horrific infernos were not tragic accidents, but highly coordinated, deliberate operations designed to systematically destroy the most obvious, undeniable physical evidence of the previous occupants, clearing the way for modern humanity to to claim the surviving infrastructure as its own. The Great Timeline of Erasure. Between the late 18th century and the mid-20th century, a systematic campaign unfolded across the globe. We did not build the grandest cities of our modern era. We simply moved into them. We inherited a fully functioning, highly advanced infrastructure that we fundamentally did not understand. Instead of preserving this monumental legacy, a massive, coordinated effort of modification, reclassification, and ultimate destruction was launched to dismantle the old world right in front of our eyes. When the new populations arrived in established metropolises like New York, San Francisco, and St. Petersburg, around the early 1800s, they found environments pre-equipped with technology far beyond horse-drawn carriages and rudimentary steam power. The towering domes of capitals and the intricate geometric layouts of massive star forts were not merely decorative civic monuments. The narrative argues these structures operated as vast networks designed to harness and distribute unlimited wireless atmospheric energy. To hide the true nature of this inherited grid, the establishment staged massive public spectacles. Look closely at the jaw-dropping scale of the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. Mainstream historians expect us to believe that hundreds of acres of magnificent, palatial complexes, featuring towering columns and colossal domes, were hastily constructed out of plaster and wood merely as a temporary fairground, only to be promptly bulldozed into the bay months later. The alternative explanation suggests these were original, fully functional Tartarian complexes. The authorities simply utilized this majestic infrastructure one final time to awe the public before deliberately demolishing the evidence to hide the truth of our past. This campaign of deliberate destruction did not stop at the world fairs. It extended directly into the heart of our most cherished urban centers. We witnessed the tragic, completely irrational demolition of architectural marvels that should have stood for centuries. The loss of the majestic Singer Building, once the tallest tower in the world, and the awe-inspiring original Penn Station in New York City, with its massive subterranean vaults and echoing halls, remains a profound tragedy of urban history. We are told these buildings were torn down simply to make way for the future. Yet these structures were brutally difficult to maintain for a population that lacked the advanced engineering knowledge of the original builders. You cannot simply maintain an atmospheric energy grid when your society only understands coal and early electricity. Furthermore, their breathtaking beauty served as a constant, undeniable reminder of a vastly superior past that had to be suppressed. Architectural critics like Zach Mortis suggest that the rapid, jarring transition into the brutal, minimalist aesthetic of modernism was not a natural evolution of human taste. It was a necessary, calculated cover-up meant to sever our connection to the past. The sheer existence of the old-world architecture was entirely too disruptive to the fragile, manufactured narrative of progressive human evolution. By replacing intricately carved masonry and soaring, energetic domes with flat blocks of glass and steel, the architects of this timeline effectively erased the physical memory of a greater civilization. The absolute absence of any logical explanation from mainstream historians regarding the incredible speed at which 19th-century cities were purportedly built is an answer in itself. We systematically dismantled the evidence of our inheritance to force the illusion that we built this world from scratch. Scavengers of a forgotten world. We have reached the culmination of our investigation into the structural impossibilities that define our modern cities. After tracing the undeniable physical evidence etched into the stone, steel, and earth of our urban environments, we are forced to confront the ultimate, unsettling question of our origins. Look at the towering skylines and the massive civic centers that anchor our society. Are we truly the brilliant, unparalleled architects of our own world? Or are we merely the scavengers of a forgotten one? For generations, we have comfortably accepted the premise that the breathtaking leap in infrastructure during the 19th century was the direct result of the Industrial Revolution and sudden human ingenuity. Yet, The physical realities we interact with every single day tell a vastly different story of civilizational continuity and the quiet, desperate reuse of salvaged infrastructure. We must synthesize the staggering anomalies we have uncovered. We have stood before the massive 15-foot portals integrated deeply into the structural core of civic centers in cities like Boston and Budapest. Mainstream historiography aggressively insists these colossal entryways are nothing more than the decorative zenith of the era, easily explained away through the lenses of high aesthetics, strict social hierarchy, and the desperate need for pre-electrical ventilation. We are told the builders simply wanted to impress visitors and allow hot air to rise. But when you attempt to reconcile the astronomical energy expenditure required to heat and maintain those vast, drafty spaces using rudimentary 19th century technology, the institutional narrative completely fractures. We have also climbed the grueling, exhausting public staircases of the Victorian era, pathways built with massive biomechanical dimensions that actively punish the modern human body. It defies all logic of design to construct public thoroughfares that demand such a taxing ceremonial gait, especially when perfectly efficient, standardized servant stairs sit hidden just a few feet away behind closed doors. Furthermore, we must continually scrutinize the completely impossible construction speeds confidently claimed by mainstream historians. The official timelines demand that we believe fleets of horse-drawn carts and unskilled laborers erected global masterpieces in mere months, a logistical feat we could barely replicate today with advanced diesel machinery and computer-aided design. The physical observation of these structures points directly toward a systematic reoccupation rather than original construction. Pushing the boundaries of this theory takes us far beyond simple architectural salvage and forces us to completely reevaluate the very purpose of our most iconic, revered monuments. We must rethink the true nature of the grandest structures on Earth, buildings that define the cultural identity of nations. Consider the soaring, intricately engineered dome of the United States Capitol, or the breathtaking, mathematically perfect symmetry of the Taj Mahal. We are explicitly instructed from childhood to view these complexes strictly as centers of modern administrative government or lavish, romantic tombs dedicated to the dead. But the sheer, overwhelming scale, the precise geometric layouts, and the universal, global presence of metallic spires and conductive domes suggest a vastly different primary function. The inheritor narrative proposes that these magnificent complexes were never originally intended to house politicians or serve as mausoleums. Instead, they were once fully active, highly functional, and deeply interconnected nodes in a massive, globally suppressed energy grid. This forces us to consider that the Great Reset of the 19th century represented much more than a simple change in geopolitical leadership or the drawing of new borders. It represented a fundamental, catastrophic, and deliberate shift in how humanity interacts with the planet itself. It was a violent severing from an era of unlimited, decentralized atmospheric energy, forcing the new population into absolute dependence on measured, heavily controlled fossil fuels. This paradigm shift brings us to the profound, deafening silence at the heart of our historical record. We are left to grapple with the glaring absence of data that absolutely should exist in our highest institutions. We must reconcile the completely missing Smithsonian records of massive skeletal remains with the thousands of highly specific municipal invoices documenting the mass lowering of doorways and the dropping of ceilings across the modern world. Mainstream academia demands we accept this as the natural, harmless decay of historical memory over time, dismissing it as a series of simple clerical errors, changing architectural tastes, and sensational newspaper fables. But the sheer, staggering volume of this missing and physically modified history points heavily toward the deliberate, meticulous pruning of a narrative that simply no longer fits the fragile paradigm of modern human supremacy. The study of these physical anomalies ensures that the vital dialogue between our forgotten past and our fabricated present remains permanently open. The old-world architecture surrounding us is not just an outdated building style or a fleeting decorative aesthetic.